I don't know how to get my presentation on here, so who's the tech person? Good afternoon, Patriots. How's everyone doing? Everyone staying awake out there? Cool. So I'm going to be talking about this blogging to journalism and bridging the gap between the two. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with blogging, because I think blogging is incredibly important. But what I'm going to talk about has to do with why you want to be taken seriously as a writer, or if you're doing news as a news person, that goes beyond just opinion. Okay? So this is going to be the journey from writing mostly opinion to covering news. So when you think about blogging, blogging is opinion based. And one of the things about that opinion based thing with blogging is there's very little ethics. So when you go out there and you start writing a story about a story or whatever, um, you don't have any ethical guidelines because it's basically your opinion. News, on the other hand, is fact based, and that also has some ethical considerations. So I handed out, there's a handout there, Cheryl helped hand out for me. On one side, it's a code of ethics, and the other side, there's a bunch of QR codes. We'll go over this in a little bit. But that code of ethics is talking about some things that you might want to hold yourself to if you're doing news. Um, Another thing that I'm going to cover is becoming a credentialed member of the media, what that means, and what that means for you. And this is something I think Lee talked a little bit about credentialing and people gatekeeping you. It happens, and we're going to talk about some of that. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about some information gathering and fact finding techniques, touching a little bit on interviewing, not that much because I know you guys got a big rundown on interviews and how to do that from an investigative standpoint. And then I'm going to talk about pulling all of these elements together. And I'm going to use this series that I wrote. It was a 50th anniversary series of 5 articles about the Second Amendment Foundation. So that's what we're going to go over. Blog. So we have the definition. What is a blog? So again, the key words here, you're talking about personal reflections, right? They're talking about publications that relates to a topic, but it's also personal commentary. And there's nothing wrong with blogging. I think some of the best news that's out there that you can get your hands on is from bloggers that write opinion. But we have to understand again, you're not getting just the facts, right? Um, Again, relies heavily on other people's writings. You're going to find something of a seed. And I do this myself. I have plenty of times when I got started really writing a lot of Second Amendment content. I said, well, what am I going to write about, right? So I found a story online and I used a search engine and I limited it to like a certain date range and I just wrote firearm in there and I said, what came up? I'm like, okay, this guy did something dumb with a gun. I said, well, I'm going to write opinion about that. Um, and again, this is a commentary related thing. So I'm taking somebody else's news or you're taking somebody else's news and we're writing about it. And there's a lot of valuable opinions that are out there. This is also a great way to get started covering Second Amendment related news or any topic for that matter. Because if you want to get up and going, all you got to do is start your own blog. No one can stop you. You can get a following, not have a following, whatever. And again, with blogging, there's no or minimal ethical boundaries. So if you want to call somebody bad names, you can. It's just you have to deal with any of the repercussions of that if they don't like that. But if you say, in my opinion, kind of covers you, right? News and journalism. So maybe this isn't a great example because I got Pulitzer up there, who was one of the guys that, pushed yellow journalism. So, but news and journalism, it's based on reporting the facts as they are. And that's what you're trying to do as a media person. So I'm obviously talking about this all from a writing perspective. I know we have plenty of video people here, new media. It's all in the same family, but I'm just talking about it from this perspective, right? It's about getting to the facts. This is what we know, right? Anything that's opinion, which should be limited or um, not as much, you're going to say it's an opinion, in my opinion, or it is my thought that, if you're going to be putting this in a news story. There's a perfect example in this room right here. There's a writer that writes, and he'll give you the news exactly what the story is. Dean, you want to wave, right? And what do you put in there? Opinion. At the bottom of some of your articles, you've said analysis, and he will delineate that this is the news and this is the facts and this is what I think about it, so you can separate one from the other, and that's a great tactic. Bias should be subtle, if anything. Obviously, all of us in here are going to be speaking about the Second Amendment probably in a positive manner, right? We wouldn't be here at the gun rights policy conference if we weren't going to be. Um, let's try to be careful with that bias so we don't look like we have favoritism. I mean, even if we do, but you want your material to be able to stand on its own so that somebody can look at that and say, okay, here are the facts, and you've gotten those ideas across. And again, there are ethical boundaries. So there are certain things that you're going to want to do your best to adhere to when you're conducting your story. So different types of news, and I kind of stole these from Britannica. Hard news versus soft news. So your hard news story is going to be more of your breaking stuff, your investigative journalism like Lee does, and then like versus your soft news, which would be actual commentary. So you have your op-eds and your featured stories, or kind of like your feel-good stuff, right? Those are just two different categories of way you can look at your news. Hard news is generally going to be like your breaking stuff, like this is happening now in the area. And then general types of journalism. So you have your news journalism, your feature journalism, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. Is that 5-part series that I'm using as an example is an example of a series of featured stories where I dove into the topic of the Second Amendment Foundation. Investigative journalism, which again is incredibly important, and then opinion pieces, analysis, columns, and reviews. And again, that's kind of where you get into that area where that's where blogging kind of was born, was with that analysis and those opinion pieces. Here's 2 articles that I wrote over at News 2A. If one of my Jersey guys wants to take a picture and send that to Sean so he could see that that's in the presentation, that'd be cool. One of the articles is clearly labeled as a opinion piece, lessons that I learned trying to be a good activist. The other one, which is also tagged as opinion, but it's under the news category because it's more straightforward. This is what happened. It's not about what I think. It's this is what I found out. This is what I learned, and I'm going to give that to you, the reader. So having that designation there is important so people know what they're reading. And watch that bias. Again, we have a tendency to lean one way or the other, and editorializing. So you don't want to editorialize what you're writing too much. Again, if it's your opinion, you want to say that it's your opinion and you want to stick to those facts. And again, the goal here is so that when somebody looks at your work, whether it's written or if it's radio broadcast or whatever, if it's news, you want them to be able to turn to that and say, hey, this is a really good news piece on this. Ethics for journalists. So that QR code is going to take you to that flyer that I gave you guys. If you want to scan it or not, no big deal. I wanted to include it as a handout. I kind of did that last minute. We're not going to go over all of these. We're going to go over a couple of points as we go through the slides. Taking responsibility for the accuracy of your work. Now, there are a couple of different categories. You guys can see them there. I know the print's a little bit small. Seek the truth and report it. So what's important here is getting to, again, facts. And that's what you want to get to. Also underneath, seek the truth and report it. Number 8, diligently seek subjects and news coverage to allow them to respond to criticism or allegations of wrongdoing. This is something that I really try to do a lot of. And Brad's laughing because he gets all the references to, I reached out to the Attorney General's office, and what did the Attorney General say? Brad, do you know what the Attorney General said? No comment, that's right. But I'm giving him an opportunity to answer for whatever I'm writing to him about. And they're tired of me. And you'll learn about this more on Sunday because I talk a little bit about that. Also, underneath the Seek Truth and Report It, they're specifically saying label advocacy and commentary. And plagiarism, that's another big thing. You also want to cite things. There's an example is this wasn't plagiarized, but we had a recent video. Personality did a video on a story that I broke with the New Jersey Knicks Research Center, right? And the personality was great about referencing, hey, the article's from Bearing Arms and it's from the New Jersey Knicks Research Center. Okay, bingo, that's perfect. Except they didn't mention who wrote the article or leave a link. So for my advice or what have you to some of the video commentary people, and Jared's great about this, he'll put the link, hey, the link is in the description, right? This other individual didn't put the link, not a big deal because the information's still getting out there, but including that link is going to help people find out more about the subject. Minimizing harm. This is one of those areas that maybe I don't do so well about because when I'm writing about the government, usually it's not friendly, and what I'm finding isn't usually good for them. So does that harm them? I don't know. But what this whole section is talking about is minimizing also harm to people. Like we need to understand that when we're writing stories about, in particular, private citizens or people that aren't in the public arena, we need to be very respectful of that and avoid pandering and the long-term implications of the extended reach of the permanent. So like once we put it out there, it's like on the Wayback Machine. Like we can call that back off the internet and it'll be there forever, right? Acting independently, avoiding conflicts of interest. So I also launched a website that does product and travel reviews, right? And sometimes companies send me stuff for free. In my About Us area, I really lay it out there and saying, hey, just because something came to us, a product or a service that came gratis, that doesn't mean they're definitely going to get a good review. And I've had situations before where a product just really didn't live up to what I thought the expectations were going to be. And so I reached out to the company. I said, hey, I put this thing on my gun. I've been using it. I'm like, I'm not feeling it. Can you explain it to me? They explained it to me. I'm like, I'm still not feeling it. And they're like, you know what? We've had other people in this situation. If you don't want to cover it, don't cover it. Not a big deal. We won't be offended by that. But they understood that my position was I'm not in the business of trying to create harm to companies. And, you know, they were respectful of the fact that I was like, I'm just going to sit this one out. Now, normally when I'm doing some work on product reviews and stuff like that, you're going to have pluses and minuses. But the fact of the matter is you want to be upfront with your readers or your viewers and saying, hey, this is a review, this is what I think about it, and you know, this came to me gratis, it didn't come to me gratis, whatever. If it's something that you use regularly, that's all the better. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about there because I do a lot of stuff in the litigation legislation arena, but now I'm in product and travel reviews, which they're the kind of opposites, right? Just being upfront about all of your relationships and above the fold, I think is important. Be accountable and transparent. I think this is kind of self-explanatory, right? You want to be able to make ethical choices when you're writing or you're doing your news coverage. So now that paper that I gave you that has the code of ethics, that comes from the Society of Professional Journalists, okay? So talking about membership has its privileges. Some venues require credentials for journalists, and this is what happened to us in New Jersey. During the event of 2020, we had an activist advocate, Alexander Rubian from NJ2AS, going to these press events that Governor Phil Murphy was hosting. And he would ask questions of the governor, and the governor was off balance because he wasn't being fed the questions in advance, allegedly. I mean, it's alleged that he was getting questions in advance of his press events. We don't know that for a fact, but you could see the way he would not be able to handle Alexander's questions. And then, of course, he's asking him very pointed Second Amendment related questioned. So what happened to Alexander is he returned back to more press events, and they didn't allow him admittance. And he was a guy that he holds a byline at AMMCon, so he's put work out there. In theory, he's a member of the press, and they were denying him entrance to these press events. About a year later, an official policy came out, and the governor's policy on press at the New Jersey events, and it says you need to be a credentialed member of the media in order to go to his press events. So there's only two places in the state of New Jersey where you can get those credentials, and they told you these are the only two: the New Jersey Press Association and the New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists. If you had to guess which one I ended up joining, you're going to know it's the Society of Professional Journalists, because that's the paper I just gave you. So to get get your credentials, you have to go forward and get your membership. So for the Society of Professional Journalists in particular, I had to join the national organization, and then I had to join the local chapter, which was the New Jersey chapter, and then I had to go further. Just because you're a member doesn't mean that you're in. That just means they took your money, right? So now I had to get credentialed. When I got credentialed, and I really wanted to get the credentialing before arguments in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals on October 25th of last year. I had been to district court. I've never been to circuit court. So I was like, having these press credentials might be beneficial to me. I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. So I applied for membership to get my credentials in August. It was August of 2023. And October came and went. No credentials, no reply. I'm writing to the contact. It was the secretary of the New Jersey chapter. Hey, I'm trying to get to court, and I want to make sure I have credentials, which I didn't need. That's the sidebar, because that time came and went, and I went to court, and that's a whole other story, right? Nothing. He's like, oh, we're having problems with our system. We're having problems with our system. So one of the challenging things for me as a writer that writes very inflammatory stuff is I had to send them basically a CV and a list of articles that were news. So for them to be news, I can't refer to the Attorney General as a bunch of bad words in the article, right, that are opinion-based. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to look through this stuff and see what I'm doing here. So I was able to find those articles, and that's what I sent in. And I'm waiting, and still nothing. And by December of 2023, they finally got back to me after I wrote them again. And they were sitting on my money the whole time. I should have charged interest, right? They're like, we were having a problem with the system, but it's worked out. You're good to go. But what we're going to do is we're going to extend, because now I was sitting on this for half a year or plus. We're going to extend your memberships, both of them, the national organization and the state organization, to the end of 2024, and then we're just going to issue your credentials January 1, 2024. You're starting out fresh. And that's how I ultimately got my press credentials for the state of New Jersey. Now that I have these press credentials, and then this is in the footer of my email when I send certain emails for comments. So Matthew Platkin's gotten plenty of emails from me with this in the footer of the email. I usually remove my phone number because I like to make these things public. When I write to whoever I'm writing to, I will PDF it and link to it so that everybody can see the source document. I put that in there so that when I'm writing to whoever the official is or whatever I'm trying to get commentary on, it says, I am a freelance member of the press seeking comment on. Okay, and at the bottom, they're seeing that I'm a vetted member of the organization that they told me I needed to be a member of in order to play ball with them. I'm not saying that it works, but they do reply to my emails, and they're not very nice all the time. I try to keep them respectful because we're looking for facts, but the stuff that I talk to them about, they're not really happy to see me pop up in their inbox. Another credentialing organization that you could look at, and they don't actually send you an ID card, and this is, again, a sidebar, National Shooting Sports Foundation media member. you can join the NSSF as a media member, and you have to send them, a bunch of your stuff like your byline or your channel or whatever you have, and they will vet you to make sure, like, hey, okay, you are media. We'll give you a media membership. Now, what's the benefit of this? It doesn't get you an automatic entrance to, say, SHOT Show, but it puts you in the system. And if you have that membership number, you plug it in and you're good to go, and they will know you and recognize you. This is very good to have if you want to establish a relationship with the NSSF and you want to be able to communicate with them professionally, which I recommend if you're going to be doing stuff on, policy and industry related things. So that was just kind of a sidebar. And this membership isn't super expensive either. I think it's like $25 a year. Definitely worth it. If you have a byline, use that byline or that channel or whatever you have and get you a membership. Okay, this is another side quest, and this is about the records request. So why is it also important to have that journalism credential that says, hey, I'm a member of the news? Earlier this year, the legislature in New Jersey changed our Open Public Records Act request process. And there's like, if the agency thinks, I'm going to read this to you directly, if the agency thinks that a requester has sought records with the intent to substantially interrupt the performance of government function, yada, 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 they could put basically a restraining order against you, and they don't have to answer any of your information requests anymore. How crazy is that? Like, that's 1984. This law passed and it was signed. So there's a note at the bottom. The Senate President Nick Scutari, who is one of the co-sponsors of this bill, he said in reports and interviews that this doesn't affect journalists and people who are members of the press, right? But if you read the law and you read the bill, that's not necessarily the case. That's not what the law says. So is it good to be credentialed? I'm going to say yes, it's good to be credentialed because I'm going to say, hey, that dude said that this doesn't apply to me. So when I'm going to do some records requests, I'm not going to end up on a list. And there's a whole bunch of other things like fee shifting and a whole bunch of other things that went down when they implemented this law. But this was probably, in my opinion, one of the scariest, is that they can put a restraining order against you from requesting more information from your government that you paid for with your tax dollars. Okay, information gathering and fact finding, research. So my 2022 presentation was on research. That QR code will take you to the YouTube video, but if you go on your cool little flyer that was handed out to you, there's a QR code there for the slide deck of this presentation. There's a QR code for that presentation and a little contact me area there too, so if any of you want to reach out to me. So I'm not going to talk too much about research. These are kind of some of the broad strokes. One of the things I wanted to bring up, Wikipedia. Everybody goes to Wikipedia for information. It's crowdsourced. It's not necessarily the best. It has bias. This we know. But what it does have is footnotes. And those footnotes will take you to seed stories. So you can go to those seed stories. So if you're doing research on something and you see a claim, you could go back and then you could see the source. If that's a trusted source, then you've got some more information that you can use to put it as an arrow in your quiver. So that's just my advice. If you're doing stuff and you want to get broad information, you end up on Wikipedia, follow the footnotes. That's my advice. Library of Congress, tremendous amount of information there. You can access that all online, most of it. Congressional records, so congress.gov, you can get a tremendous amount of information there on bills. You can get information, all of the transcripts of what our Congress critters are doing. Very important, so you can quote these policymakers and what they're doing and saying actually on our dime. Very important resource. Two other ones, Google Books, Google Scholars. Google Books is what I like to call like a clearinghouse for old yellowed papers. You could go there and there's like all kinds of archived old books that you can get for free, and it's there, and you can just hit Control F and find what you want, and you're like, holy cow, this is tremendous. So I recommend people jump on Google Books if you're trying to find some obscure thing from history. It might be there and it's going to be free. And Google Scholar's kind of cool because if you're going to go and jump on the Google machine and you want to do a search, you're not going to get all kinds of weird advertisements or AI stuff in your search results on Google Scholar. It's going to be scholarly papers. More on information gathering and fact finding, Freedom of Information Act, public records. Again, that's going back to the OPRAs, the Open Public Records Act requests that I do in New Jersey. We're entitled to this information. If we want this information, it's ours for the taking, so you request it. However, there might be a fee attached. So a lot of the stuff that I'm doing on the state level in New Jersey, I'm not getting hit with fees. They just hand over the information. They don't bother me. But I was doing a story, and I've got one there, 2023 Evo Joe. There was as like kind of a YouTube personality that's into cars. His name is Evo Joe. And you guys might remember the story. He got pulled over, and the police officer was kind of giving him a hard time about how he was carrying his gun. And the officer was telling him that he was wrong, and it was this and that. And so he made this like inflammatory video, and it was very entertaining. And well, I'm like, I want to cover this. So I got a hold of Evo Joe and ended up having to do a bunch of records requests. I got the videos. So I ended up getting the body cam videos and the dash cam videos of what actually went down. I was able to use that to help me formulate what happened. And then I published that. Well, the thing is, I had to pay for the videos, and I ended up paying more money for the videos than I even made on publishing the articles. But I thought it was that important to get the actual truth out there. Seeking quotes. This is a cool one, and that's what I was saying earlier is I'm a freelance journalist, and I cover Second Amendment related topics, right? What I like to do is draw a parallel. Brad, if the Pats and the Giants are in a game, who's going to win? Wait, slow down, one at a time. We got Pats over here. Pats, really no conflict of interest. You're a Jersey guy now. You're both wrong. You know who wins? You're both wrong. The NFL is who wins. When you ask for comment, what you're doing is showing your readers, you're showing your viewers that you care about the story and you're invested. What are the possible outcomes if you ask for comment? You get a comment. Okay, you won, right? I got a comment. That comment could be contrary to what you're saying, or it could be supporting what you're saying. Either way, you win because you're making a point. They could, what? Write you back and say they declined to comment. Does that tell a story? If you're going to have the time to go through and ask a source like, hey, I want your commentary on this, and they say, we declined to comment, well, that kind of speaks for its own. And then, of course, there's my personal favorite. There's we're not going to respond to your email. They failed to respond to our multiple requests for comment on this story. So that leaves you, the reader, or whoever's taking in the news, or if you're listening in on a video, whatever your medium is, that leaves those people to say, hey, this person was asked about this, essentially called out, and they don't have the chutzpah to respond and speak for what they're doing. I think what this guy's saying, there's more to this story. Interviews. Now, I know Lee did a whole workshop on interviews and interviewing techniques and how to handle that. I'm just going to go over some broad strokes on some stuff that I like to do and that I also implemented in my SAF 50th anniversary series. Do some background digging, right? You have an opportunity to do some research on whoever you're going to interview for whatever purpose, right? What I like to do is find other people in your field you can rely on, aka steal from. So when I was interviewing subjects for this story, I was like, well, who do I know that have interviewed Alan Gottlieb, Julianne Versnell, Dave Workman, Lauren Hill, Bill Sack, and Adam Kraut? Those are the people that I interviewed. I said, well, I spent a lot of time on Gun Freedom Radio, taking apart interviews that Cheryl did. I spent some time on Riding Shotgun with Charlie, taking apart interviews that he did. So find other sources that you can lean on to get information. And what you do is you have the ability to build on what you learn in their interviews, and then you could dig deeper and get to the minutia of a little bit more of what what they have to say or they've got going on. But again, this requires work. You got to put the time in, and I get it. Like watching hours of footage for interviews to get you up to speed on what you want to talk about takes time. But if you want to make a good, solid story, you got to put that work in. One of the other things that I say here also in interviewing techniques, don't lead, just ask your question. Like, don't keep digging. Don't be like CNN. Don't try to get a manipulative comment out of the person. Ask the question. Be direct about it. If they give you an answer that you're not really sure you understand, or if it doesn't really hit what you're trying to get at, ask for clarification if you need to, and then move on. But there's no need to lead people because the story is the facts, and hopefully they're going to give you those facts. A little bit different than interrogating someone. I mean, that's going to be a little bit different if you're really digging deep. But if you're just doing a special interest story, there's no reason to do an aha moment on Alan over asking him about stuff that happened 50 years ago. It's whatever he says it is what it is, right? Pulling it all together. So this is where I talk about the series I did on SAF. September of 2023, I had this great idea. I said, oh my God, Second Amendment Foundation, it's their 50th anniversary next year on August 26th. I want to write about it. I'm like, okay. So I reached out to some of the folks here and I said, hey, I want to write a series on SAF. I'm not really sure what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do, but what do you guys think? They're like, we support you. Here's your blessing, and then set up the interviews, right? What did this series involve? It involved taking in other audio interviews. Like I said, I looked at some of Cheryl's work. I looked at some of Charlie's work. I also did some reading, a lot of reading online, tried to find some good sources of information. Books and literature, believe it or not, there is or was a book out on Second Amendment Foundation that was released on its 30th anniversary, so it was a little dated. But what was cool about getting an opportunity to read that was I'm looking at the history of SAF 20 years ago and what they thought then, right? So those were my sources of what I used to put the series together. This is where I say I'm not a writer. I'm a writer. I'm not a podcaster. But what does that mean? I hate taking notes. When you're interviewing somebody or you're writing a story, you got to take notes. So what do a lot of people do in the news media? They'll do recordings. If you're going to do a long expose on somebody, I'm going to record the conversation. Makes my life easy. Well, then you have to go back and listen to the recording, and then you have to write that. I remember I was covering a gubernatorial debate a couple of years back in Jersey, and I had to kept going back and forth with the DVR, and it took me like a half an hour to get a paragraph because I'm like, did he say this? Did he say that? Now what I do is I take that file, I dump it into a transcript generator. I can look at that transcript and the words come up and then they light up like it's like karaoke. The little ball is bouncing, and if oh, that's an error, you can change that. Oh, that's an error, and then you have your transcript. Now you can look at that. Once you've crisped up your transcript, you can go through and do find functions on your transcript. What do I want to pull from this? So you can give a crisp, great quote in whatever you're working on. What I use, and I don't know if I recommend it. It's just what I use is Otter AI. That's was one that somebody else recommended to me. There's a free version of it and a paid version. I have the paid version. I'm not really necessarily completely thrilled with what they did with my level of membership on the paid version, but that's neither here nor there. Um, then the other thing that I started to do was release my audio. So if I'm interviewing whomever, Cheryl, I'm like, Cheryl, let's talk about this. I have my audio. Well, I'm going to release a crisp version of that audio. There's no reason why I shouldn't, because you, the reader, because this is going into editorial, should have an opportunity to have access to what I have access to. So I'll say, Cheryl, what we're going to do is let's talk about everything off the record before and after the on the record portion. We'll do a crisp interview. We'll dump it up on YouTube with 2 pictures of our beautiful faces, and it'll be great, right? Makes sense. But the audio recordings aren't always the best over the phone with a recorder. So what did I do? I just let Zoom be my notebook. Now I'm just going to go and I'm going to call you up and say, hey, we're going to do a Zoom interview. It's going to be video unless we can't because of whatever reason. But you have a crisp recording of what you're doing, and it's perfect for release. And you can release this to your audience, right? And then what I like to do is take that and I'll embed that into the editorial. And that's back to what I'm talking about, the editorial. I'm going to base the editorial now off of that transcript, right? So I'm going to work off that transcript, what I remember, any notes that I may have taken throughout the process, and then embed. So for the SAF series, I said I had 6 individual interviews, and one of the big challenges was keeping all of the content organized, because when I got done with it, I had 3 videos, which we'll talk about in a second, but it was an hour and a half of finished material. So if it's an hour and a half of finished material, do you know how much was not finished? A lot. So I spent about 3 weeks trying to pull just the video together. But the first thing I did was come up with a finished video product, and that's where I worked from going forward. So like, I'm not a podcaster, I'm not a video guy, but I'm using Zoom as my notebook, and it worked out very well. So with the end result, and I'm going to try to not confuse you too much, but it was a 5-piece editorial series. Part 1 was about the inception and the beginning of SAF in the early years. Part 2 was all about Alan. Part 3 was just about the present state of SAF. Part 4 was all about Adam. Part 5 is the future vision of SAF. And then I also included some reflections that people gave me on Alan and the work that he did. The 3-piece video series, and this is where like my original vision was, it was like a Christmas carol of the Second Amendment Foundation that goes to Christmas past and present. So that's all it was. The videos was the beginning, the middle, and the end, right? What are we going to say in the future? What is the future of the foundation? So the unique challenges were melding all of the pieces together, right? Because that's a lot of content to do. 6 video interviews to make into 3 mini documentaries is basically what it turned into. And then again, those videos got embedded to the different segments of editorial. And if you want to read the article, you read the article, you get to the video, you're interested in more, you've got that. What did I learn? And I think this is what the key thing is, right? What did we learn in the process? I learned a lot about the Second Amendment Foundation because I spent quite a long time doing research on them. I learned the importance of being organized, and in the editing and in the writing copy, this is tremendous. Now, my questions were pretty well organized, but the first 3 interviews that I did were Alan, Julianne, and Dave Workman. They were a little bit more open-ended. There was structure, but I wanted them to just talk. Let them talk. I want as much information as I could get. But when you have that stream of consciousness, you're going to be bouncing around from subjects. So like editing and pulling things apart and trying to come up with a story, like Rich said, it's important to take all these elements and tell a story, was challenging, right? The latter 3 interviews were more structured, less open-ended. I was like, this is what I want to know. This is where I want to get. Let's go and move forward, right? So the 2 things that I learned, right? The structured is better for the writer or the journalist because it makes it easy to edit and run with. However, the open-ended questions yield different surprises and results because you might get something that you didn't know you wanted, right? And you just let people talk and they'll just keep talking. So that becomes challenging if you got to turn that into a finished product, but there's some, good surprises there. I also learned that the research prior to the interviews paid off handedly. Being able to ask an educated question about the history of the organization definitely gave me dividends in the final product. And then I also learned that writing about a topic or people that you're intimately acquainted with, it can be difficult because the people, the organization. How do you remove yourself from the story? It's difficult to remain unbiased, but it is very doable if you just remember what's the story, because it's not about me, it's about them, right? So just to wrap things up, these are some things to remember. News is about facts, not your thoughts, right? If it's opinion, you want to say it's opinion. Editorial is fine and dandy, as are soft news pieces. Blogging is great. These are all valuable things, but that's not necessarily quote unquote news. If you need credentials, find the organization that works for you in your jurisdiction. Every state is different, so it's not like you get a national press credential. I'm lying. There is one. It's called the First Amendment, right? But when the tyrants want you to have a credential, these are the hoops that you might have to jump through. I went with the Society of Professional Journalists and the state chapter of New Jersey, and that actually paid off for me because I'm actually making contacts with people who are traditionally not, let's say, kind to our kind, but coming to them as a colleague saying, hey, this is my unbiased reporting on this, that paid off. Don't be afraid to try new things. Like I said, let Zoom be your notepad. That's okay. Remember to be ethical. Again, there's the whole code of ethics. I'm not going to read it to you, but you have it there. And do your research on the people that you're interviewing. Remember to do that. It's going to pay off, and stay organized. So that's the end of the presentation portion. There's all my information where you can find me and my contact me information. Anybody questions? Seeing none. Okay, thank you.